The All About Nothing podcast may have language and content
that isn't appropriate for some.
Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, Nothingers, to the All About Nothing podcast. This is episode number 295. I am Barrett Gruber, joined by Zach King. Welcome, Zach. Good morning.
Good morning, Barrett.
Please subscribe and share the show. That's how we get new listeners. Also, please consider supporting the show financially by visiting theallaboutnothing.com and becoming an official member and proudly calling yourself a true Nothinger. We'll have more details on that at the end of the show. If you can't do that, please give us a 5-star review, a like, and follow us across all of social media. You can find links at theallaboutnothing.com. Real quick, before we get started, and we got a great interview coming up here in just a minute, with Zalal Habibi, who is part of the resistance in Iran. But we're going to get into more of that here in just a minute. I want to thank Alex Avenger for appearing on the show this week, or last week, to discuss the opening of the 2026 spring leagues, the adult softball, kickball, dodgeball, all of the. I don't think dodgeball is part of it this year, but all the adult leagues. Sign up is closed right now for the spring registration, but it was very successful, and a lot of the leagues sold out. So very good time to be had. If you want to join, you still can. They have team captain invites available right now for all the leagues, but you get those white shirts, and everyone will know you signed up late and paid more. So,
well, and I'd like to take a little bit of credit in our part of advertising for them and just our awesome delivery and of giving the facts, letting you know where this stuff is.
Yeah. Alex didn't explain to me why, but they moved the kickball over to a different park for the spring season, which caused confusion for me because I think at some point during the spring season, we're going to wind up going out there and calling a game to promote the summer season that's coming up. So kickball game to be called. I know Bill Kemmler loves hearing us call those games because he skips right over those episodes. All right. So our guest today is a peaceful voice for those who have been silenced. Zalal Habibi is a prominent human rights and women's rights advocate and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. For over 2 decades, she has been at the forefront of the movement for a secular, democratic, and non-nuclear Iran. Her journey is deeply personal. It's sparked by the loss of her father in the 1988 massacre of political prisoners and has led her to the world stage, where she now briefs international leaders and speaks for millions of Iranians demanding change. Today, we are going to discuss the current execution spree in Iran, the incredible bravery of women leading the resistance, and what a democratic future for the Middle East actually looks like. So please welcome to the show, Zalal Habibi. Welcome, Zalal.
Welcome.
Thank you, Barrett, and thank you, Zach. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'd like to greet all those tuning in to the podcast this morning.
Absolutely. So I made a mistake. I thought that you were, for some reason, and I don't know why, I guess it was because I saw one of the interviews that you had done with the Washington Post or the Washington Times and thought for some reason you were in Washington. You grew up in Washington, D.C., is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in D.C., and I've practically lived most of my life there. But yeah,
okay.
Currently I'm in Paris.
And the weather in Paris is as nice as the weather in South Carolina. It is a rainy day here in South Carolina. So I want to start out. You have been an activist for over 20 years. Can you take us back to that initial spark? How did the loss of your father during the 1988 massacre shape, your path?
I think that, I think my parents and their activism in the Iranian resistance did play a major role in my life, or made a major impact on me, because I was introduced to the human rights situation in Iran from very early on. Or I remember meeting victims of torture when I was 4 or 5 years old, and that so I realized, even as a child, I knew that okay, we're living here in a democratic system, and we have these basic freedoms, but people in Iran are denied these same rights, and children in Iran don't have the rights that I do here. And so I was always conscious of that, and that really brought a sense of responsibility for me, even though I was a child, but I felt like I have a responsibility, or it's important not to take for granted what you have. And that's what I grew up with. So I would go to info booths with my my mom, like at the age of, I don't know, 5, 6 years old, to try to, tell people like, you need to hear this. This is what's happening to children in Iran, and this is what's going on and whatnot. And so, or like with my dad, because he was a writer and a human rights activist, I would get into, so he tended to be home more with us because he was, working and writing and whatnot. And I would get into these conversations with him, like, first of all, I would have him explain to me what it is that he's writing. And then I would start, just scribbling, and he'll be like, what are you doing? And I just repeat that to him, like, this is what I'm writing right now, and this is what I'm working on. But that became something that, I followed and I had a passion for, the human rights situation in Iran. And my parents, and the community that I grew up with, they always told us, it's really important. I don't know how much you're familiar with like Persian culture, but education is very important in our culture. Like, to be educated and following your studies and whatnot. So we're always told that, it's their responsibility, the previous generation, to free Iran, and it will be our responsibility to build Iran. And so my plan, my roadmap, what I thought from like day one was, I have to study and become something important to be able to serve my people one day. So that was like the life path that I had chosen. I was actually going to go and study medicine. I had gotten a full scholarship and was going to go pursue medicine. But the summer that I graduated from high school, that summer, the student uprisings broke out in Iran. And this is the summer of 1999. At that time, it was the first time since 1980s that we're seeing nationwide protest in Iran form. And it was the first time that it was being televised, because it was the start of cable TV and CNN and whatnot. And so it was being broadcasted. And so we could see the scenes and we could see what was happening. And for me, that was a major turning point. I remember watching those scenes and thinking, I can't be a bystander. I can't just watch and see my people die and then just be watching and hoping that Iran will be free. So we'll take a plane and go to Iran. It just didn't feel right for me. And so that's when I decided to join the Iranian resistance. The reality is that, as you mentioned, in 1988, actually, my father was killed by the regime. But that summer, the regime had over 30,000 political prisoners executed in a matter of a few weeks. It was right after the end of the Iran-Iraq War. Khomeini knew he had to spread some kind of fear in society to be able to keep his control on power, because for 8 years, he had suppressed all forms of dissent by saying we have foreign war. If you say anything, you're, a spy, or you're working with the enemy or whatnot. So, from 1980 till 1988 was the war, and the revolution was in 1979. So it was just a few months after the start of the revolution. And the reality is that people, like within the first few months after the revolution, they're like, hey, this is not what we bargained for. This is not what we revolted for. We revolted for, to have like a democracy, a republic, not a Islamic state, a religious state. And unfortunately, it's using the name of religion, because in reality, everything that this regime has stood for in the past 47 years, they name themselves Islamic Republic, but it's neither Islamic or a republic. It's just using that for power. So, the resistance started against Khomeini from the first days practically, but full-fledged resistance started from June 20th, 1981, when Khomeini opened fire on a peaceful protest of 500,000 people in Tehran. That was a spontaneous protest. And from that day, they killed, Khomeini gave a command via radio saying that you have open hands to fire. And unfortunately, thousands of people were killed that day. And since that day, the mass executions began in Iran. I know people personally firsthand who were arrested as teenagers and were in prison at that time. Some of them were arrested like before that protest, some after, for like passing out pamphlets or newspapers in the streets, trying to raise awareness. But they remember counting every night the coup de grace that would be fired at prisoners and how many people would be executed. So every night they would count about 200, 300, 400 shots, single shots being fired by the firing squad that killed people. And unfortunately, back then, Khomeini would actually have the names of those they had executed published daily in the newspaper. So a lot of families who didn't know what had happened to their children were looking in the newspapers to see every day, going through that list to see if their loved one's name is there. And you could just imagine the psychological torture that is for them. The regime would also publish pictures of, kids, really children, and would say, "Will the parents of these children come and identify their bodies because we don't even know their names and they've been executed." And with that, Khomeini was able to spread fear because he sent this message to society that I see no borders when it comes to executions. Yes, I execute 13-year-old children, elderly mothers, pregnant women. I see no borders. And that is how this regime has been able to, keep afloat in all these years. Just in 2025, there were over 2,200 executions carried out in Iran. And this is aside from those who are being killed in the streets. This is aside from, people who the regime kills in different methods every day. And just in the uprisings that we witnessed that broke out on December 28th, 2025, and carried on in January of 2026, thousands and thousands of people have been killed. The reality is we have not been able to verify the exact numbers just because there was a 19-day communication blackout. So all forms of communication inside the country and with the outside world were cut off. So all phone lines, all forms of internet connection, everything was disconnected. People inside of Iran, they couldn't even for the first 3 days, there was no connection. But after that, they couldn't even call someone who's outside of their province or their city. So with that, the regime tried to be able to control the scenario and to make sure that people are not aware about the extent of the killings or whatnot, to be able to control the narrative there. But unfortunately, as you've probably seen the images of the morgues, and just on the ground in different halls, the regime has laid out the bodies and told the families to come and identify their loved ones. And so you have to go one by one through all these body bags to try to find someone. And every face that you're seeing, you see it's young people. Like, for the most part, the people who were killed were under the age of 30. There are a lot of teenagers, a lot of young people in their early 20s, and just imagine having to walk through that. And unfortunately, for instance, there was a case in Kermanshah that two brothers were killed in the protest in the first week of the protest. Their parents ended up committing suicide, though. And because they just felt like, what do we have to live for anymore? It's a very difficult situation for people inside of Iran right now. But what is really important, I think, is the messages that they are giving ever since the internet. Right now, there is some internet connection. It's trickled. It's not, complete, but still there's ways of communication. And so people have been trying to get that information out and share it with the world and, what had happened, what they witnessed. They say the streets of Iran smell of blood because so many people were killed in the streets. But they keep on saying that what's important is the atmosphere in society. It's not that this is over. They say this is continuing. We are going to continue. There's martial law right now, so that's why you're not seeing it. But people are using every possibility to show their defiance and to show that their steadfastness. And people are saying, even though people are mourning, but it's more that they have, a new resolute, feeling of, we will avenge their deaths. We will continue this path till freedom, because they understand that when you look at the history of the Iranian regime, every few years there's a major uprising. The regime cracks down brutally and then buys time for itself. And then the next time you have to start again. And then there's that bloodbath again. So they realize that, look, first of all, no one's going to hand us freedom on a silver platter. We have to pay the price for it ourselves. But we have to pay that price. We can't just think of ourselves or safeguarding our own families. This is the path forward. And a lot of the youth right now, especially the Gen Z, everyone, they're saying, look, we're alive, but what we have is not a life. This is not living. So they understand that if we continue to just try to think of ourselves, we are going to be continuing the same path that the previous generations have come so this far. This is why the regime has lasted for 47 years. Right now is the time that we need to actually be willing to make that sacrifice. And what's interesting is that you saw like a lot of these youth before going to the streets, they said their final farewells to their families, or they left small video clips or whatever for their family to be found if they do pass away or if they're killed. But you see that, that resolve and the fact that they understand the risk that they're taking. And I think that is what the regime fears the most, because there's nothing more powerful than a nation that has come together to be able to take their destiny into their own hands and to change the system.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask was, because for people that don't know, the way that the power structure works in Iran is you have the supreme leader, correct, who is the head of the country, right? And then you have the president who is elected. I'm using air quotes. And the president of Iran sort of operates as the second head of the government, but the supreme leader, it's not an elected position. It's chosen by God. I guess I don't know how.
No, it's a guardian council, but it's like then Khomeini and then it's Khamenei. So it's just it's a life. It's the same thing as monarchy, really, actually. But it is the heir is chosen by that guardian council and not hereditary, but it's the same principle, I guess. But yeah, as you said, Iran is not a democracy. There's a supreme leader who controls everything. And then there's a selected president, which is selected by Khamenei again. And it is a puppet, really. It doesn't have any power, really, in the country. The country is mostly run by the Office of the Supreme Leader and the IRGC. And so that is the structure there. They do have this guardian council or whatever who is supposed to be looking over these issues and matters and whatnot. But as you said, it's not a democratic system, or there's no way of reforming this system because it is based on the Vilayat Faqih, which is supreme leader. And so that is how it's structured. And it is structured that way to make sure that they can keep their power intact under whatever circumstances.
What is the biggest thing you think that Western politicians or media get wrong about the Iranian opposition and maybe Iran in general?
Well, I think that, first of all, we have to understand the history of Iran in a bit, but also the current climate, the situation. The reality is that Iran is not like many countries in the region. First of all, it has an organized resistance movement. The National Council of Resistance of Iran was formed in July 1981 and has stood as a parliament in exile for 44 years now. Its president-elect is Mrs. Mahjabi. She is the president-elect for the interim government after the fall of the regime. So the National Council of Resistance of Iran actually has a clear roadmap. There will be a 6-month interim government, and then there will be a constitutional assembly that will come together to put together the new constitution, which will be elected by the people. And then that process will probably take about 2 years, and then there will be free elections in Iran. And that has been outlined by this resistance for decades now. And it's actually, what's important is that they have withstood the test of time. It's not just in words or in writing. People have seen in action how this resistance works together. In the National Council of Resistance of Iran, you find people from different ideological backgrounds or beliefs. You see people from all ethnicities represented. You see all the different religious minorities, or also like the atheist and whatnot, all represented side by side in this coalition. And everyone has the same vote. So even for instance, if you have the different parties, they each have one vote no matter their size. So for instance, the MEK is the largest organization member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, but they have the same vote as, any other group that is part of the NCRI. And I think that's really important because they stand for like a secular democratic republic in Iran. They believe in separation of religion and state. They believe that all the double standards in society need to be removed. Everyone needs to be granted their rights. They believe in the autonomy of the different ethnicities of Iran. They believe in a non-nuclear Iran. They believe in having an independent judiciary, something that Iran has not had in the past 100 years. So it's, when you look at the roadmap, it's a clear map and it's a clear guideline to make sure that you're on the right path and you can guarantee the formation of a democratic republic in Iran. And I think that's very key. And that is actually one of the reasons that people feel like they're willing to take that leap of faith and, sacrifice even their lives to make sure that we see that freedom, because they can be rest assured that there is a, clear path forward. Also, like for instance, 52% of this parliament in exile are women. And what's important is like the MEK, which is the main organization who's a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the entire leadership council are women. And it's been like that for 30 years. This movement has been fighting the most misogynist regime in the world in history, practically, but with having women in leadership and being able to see that potential in the women of Iran to be able to overcome such brutal dictatorship. And I think that, just every part of it that you look at, 120,000 people have been executed for supporting this movement.
Wow.
In Iran and since 1981 till now. But this movement is the first that from over 20 years ago, Mrs. Rajavi, she presented her 10-point plan. In it, she called for the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture and execution in a free Iran. So that in itself is a guarantee that, look, the day after, it's not going to be chaos and taking revenge on, those who have really butchered our people, and these murderers who are ruling our country. And that shows, first of all, the principles and the values of this movement that says no one has the right to take away someone else's life. No matter what crime they've perpetrated, you need to have independent judiciary systems. You need to have them held accountable for the crimes they've perpetrated, but that does not give you the right to take away another life or to use inhumane methods of torture and whatnot that we have unfortunately suffered from, both during the time of the Shah with the Savak, and who was known for the notorious execution methods and tortures that they carried out. And that same system, only the name was changed from Savak to Savama. Only the name was changed. It's the same system, same structure, same methods that are being used by this regime now. And so we don't want to see a repetition of that. And I think one of the misconceptions that the West does have is when they come to the issue of Iran, they just see two options on the table.
Sure.
Like, for instance, they say, well, the solution is either war or appeasement. You have to either negotiate with the regime or you have to go to war with the regime. No, there's a third option: support the Iranian people and their organized resistance to bring about that change. The policy of appeasement, unfortunately, has had a grave price for the people of Iran, because they're the ones who are being used as the bargaining chips at the table. And eventually, policy of appeasement leads to war, because you reach a point that, you come to a point that there's no other solution. On the other hand, war is not the solution, because even if you understand the dynamics of Iran, even if you want to look at it even logically, even if we oppose foreign war because of the experience that we have with foreign intervention, but even if we were not opposed to foreign war due to that history, even if you look at it a bit logically, first of all, Iran's terrain is very different. We have desert, we have sea, we have mountains, we have everything. Troops on the ground is not going to be able to cover it. And Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq, 4 times the population of Iraq. It's a very different, dynamics. And the regime knows that. Western powers know that. So they know war is not the solution. It's not going to bring democracy. It hasn't brought democracy for any other country, but it's definitely not going to actually end well for anyone in Iran. On the other hand,
Go ahead.
you
Sorry.
look at Iran's geopolitically. I mean, the fact that, or in the history, look, Reza Shah, he was brought in by the British. He was someone who was in the military. With a military coup, they brought him into power. And he started the Pahlavi dynasty. When he wasn't serving those purposes anymore, he was taken out. And then he was sent to exile, and his son was brought in. A few years after that, because there was a movement that started with the 1906 constitutional revolution and whatnot. So people elected a prime minister, and that was Dr. Mossadegh. He was the only democratic government Iran has ever seen to this day in recent centuries. And well, he was taken out by the coup d'etat, by the CIA and MI6, because he nationalized Iran's oil, and that was not to the benefit of the West.
Of
So
course.
the Shah was reinstated, and from that moment, the Shah knew that it's not like there are no guarantees that he's going to stay in power. So what did he do? He strengthened the Savak and created a one-party system. He called for all other parties had to be dissolved, and there was only one party, Vastakhiz. And he said if anyone doesn't like it, they can leave the country. If not, they will be arrested. And that is how he ruled. And well, that led to the 1979 revolution, that the people, revolted against the Shah, and they wanted an end to this monarchy in this system. And unfortunately, though, their revolution was hijacked. Why? Because it was the Cold War era. 6 months before the fall of the Shah, it was clear that he was, on the last limbs, especially after September 7th, 1978, where their peaceful protest was turned into a bloodbath. Over 1,000 people were killed just in Tehran by the Shah's eternal guards. The world knew that, this regime is on the brink of falling apart. So they were thinking about what comes next, because it was the Cold War. USSR was bordering Iran, and Iran has always played a very important geopolitical role. So what's going to happen? So they brought Khomeini, who was in exile in Iraq, in Najaf, to Paris, and they had their negotiations with him, and he, gave them certain promises that he never intended to keep. But the West thought, well, he's a fundamentalist, so he's not going to fall. He's not going to have good relations with the USSR, which don't believe in God and whatnot. So because that's his, criterion. And so that was the best choice that they felt, because they were not sure about the actual revolutionaries, because they were progressive movements who had overthrown really a monarchy. So they're like, these people are not people who are going to be giving in to US interference or Western interference in their country. They want to actually build a democracy in their country, and that was not what they were looking for. And so the people of Iran have paid that price 47 years now. And now we have come to a crossroads that we are on the verge. Everyone knows that the regime can't return to pre-December 20, and it doesn't have the capability to do that. It's in a very weak position right now, and every front that you look at, the regime doesn't have a place that they could, really put their foot in. The Iranian regime has always been able to rule on two pillars. One has been suppression internally, which, the suppression of women is part of that, because if you have 50% of society in your grip because of, the systematic suppression of women, then you can control all of society too. And with executions, torture, and everything that it has done over these years, that's, I think, everyone is aware of to some extent of it. The other is what they call export of revolution, but what we call export of terrorism and fundamentalism. And it's warmongering. So the Iranian regime is the number one state sponsor of terror, and it's the number one country in execution and torture. So that is how it has been able to move forward. With a lot of countries, they have gone through negotiations and appeasement through economic means, giving them free oil in exchange for whatever the regime wanted from them. And unfortunately, governments have given in to that, and we've seen it over and over and over again. And then in recent years, that it doesn't have those capabilities as much as it used to, it has resorted to, what they actually openly state now, hostage diplomacy, making threats, and that is how it's been able to continue. A few years ago, I think about 10 years ago, Khamenei in a speech said, "We fight on the streets of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, so we don't have to fight in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz." Well, the reality is that Bashar Assad fell. Hezbollah has been practically dismantled. So that foot of the regime has been cut off. It doesn't have that, foothold it used to have in the region. Its proxy groups have fallen apart, and it doesn't have the means to fund them as much as it used to. So there's no loyalty there if you're not funding them. So the regime doesn't have that grip, and that's why, you see all of the internal issues coming up on top, because there's no other excuse anymore. We can't, create a smokescreen with what's happening in the region and what's happening in this country and that country. So that is the current circumstances that Iran has. The reality is that there isn't a single place that you could put your finger on that has not been completely destroyed by this regime. Iran has a water shortage now, which is unprecedented in our history. And it's due to the dam systems that the regime has created for its nuclear program.
Mm-hmm.
And then people in Iran don't have electricity for at least 2-3 hours a day. The reason is because the IRGC has been using, the power network really for its Bitcoin farms or whatnot. And so, because that's how they are making their income now that they're, under sanction and everything. It has ruined completely the country. I mean, to this point that about 2 months ago, Pezeshkian said we will probably have to evacuate all of Tehran because of the structures that are falling apart. So this is really, I mean, literally there's a place that you could put your finger on that is, managing somehow. And the reality is that in the previous, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so from the NCRI's, or I'm sorry, the
NCRI is correct.
NCRI's perspective, obviously the regime can't just continue on the path that it's on. Where do they see the Iranian government's support coming from? Because it can't be. I mean, I have to assume, like here in the United States, we have a two-party system where one party's in power, the other party opposes it. And then 4 years later, the roles switch and the party in power is being opposed by the party not in power. With a one-party system, I just have to imagine a scenario where the people of Iran aren't supportive of it. But how does the government itself continue to stand with no support from the people?
As I said, through suppression and killings.
Yeah.
That is how it is able to manage. And first of all, just to give you an example, this week, just a few days ago, was the anniversary of the 1979 revolution, February 11th. And the regime held a ceremony in Tehran to celebrate the fact that everything that they were saying was like, see, we survived another year. We haven't been overthrown yet. So that's what they're celebrating. And the reality is, even the regime itself, for years, it has said that we don't have popular support. They say the regime itself says it's less than 10%. I mean, actual numbers of the regime itself, they say support is under 10%. And that's mostly like their own families or those who have interest in this regime staying in power.
Or it's a made-up number.
I mean, there are those who it's a very small margin, but it is those who actually have interest in this regime, and it's staying in power. So the regime knows that it's on the brink of falling apart. So that's why it needs to become more brutal. I mean, if you look in the past 10 years, we've had 4 major uprisings in Iran. Khamenei got the message from the first uprising that happened in 2017 and then 2019. After 2019, if you look at what the regime has been doing, they got the message in 2019 that, they're on the verge of, being overthrown. And they realized that they've reached that point of no return. 2019, the regime shut off the internet connections and they killed 1,500 protesters within 3 days. And after that, they knew that it was only with martial law that they were controlling things, but people were looking for an excuse to come to the streets again. The only thing that saved them was COVID. COVID came. Everyone had to, first of all, the regime knew that COVID had come into Iran, and first, they did nothing about it. They allowed it to spread because they're like, it's better for people to die this way than come to the streets. They had parliamentary elections or selections, and they allowed it to be held, knowing that COVID had already come into Iran and people had it, and just keeping it under wraps for it to spread in society. And unfortunately, Iran, I think, had one of the highest percentage of death tolls in COVID. And so with that, they bought time, because everyone had to be in quarantine. So, no one's coming in the streets. And then we had the 2022 uprisings after the death of Mahsa Amini. And then now. The reality is that just last year, I think it was in April or May, maybe it's in June, there was an article that came out in one of the state-run medias. It said, we need a repetition of 1988 to make sure that we can stay afloat. So it was a clear call for, we need to turn to mass executions if we want to keep our power. The reality is, after the 2019 uprisings, you saw Raisi be brought in as the president of the regime. Raisi, who was he? He was a man who had a 6th grade education, elementary school education.
Wow.
He became the president of Iran. The only thing that he had in his resume was executions. He was one of those who was in the death committees in the 1988 massacre. So he had shown his loyalty to this regime because he had blood on his hands. So they knew that this person, he's going to be with them till the end because, he was one of those who led the death committees in 1988 massacre. So that's why they brought him in. After the helicopter crash that he died, they brought in Pezeshkian, and everyone was like, why Pezeshkian? He's supposed, who is he even? He's a doctor, and like whatever. He was someone that Khamenei could control. He has, under his time, executions have increased in comparison to the time of Raisi. So just imagine, in the past 2 years that he has been in power, executions have increased even in comparison to the butcher of 1988. So that is how the regime is keeping itself afloat. Just, that is the mechanisms that they're using is execution, torture, killing. But you see, on the other hand, the people of Iran have learned their lessons from this experience. The reality is, I think about 10 years ago, Mrs. Rajabi announced a movement to seek justice, to draw attention first for the 1988 massacre, to try to end impunity, because she said it's not an issue of just something that has happened in the past. This is a continuation. And so if you don't end impunity, this cycle will repeat itself.
Yeah.
Especially in the days that the regime knows its days are numbered, they're going to turn back to those same methods and those same, methods that they used. And that is exactly what has happened. And so, but in the past 10 years, the reality is there had been silence before about the 1988 massacre. To be honest, for the first time after 37 years, this year, the United Nations brought the issue of 1988 massacre in its annual resolution against the human rights violations in Iran. After 37 years, for the first time. And that was with a lot of work that we were able to get that in. So over these years, people have become aware of the 1988 massacre, what had happened. Amnesty International did a 200-page report on it. Then it was called, a genocide. And in fact, it's the greatest massacre after World War II that was carried out. So once that attention was brought to that, the people of Iran also became more aware of, this is what these mass graves are, because these mass graves are everywhere throughout Iran. People started realizing it, and it turned into a momentum and a movement inside of Iran too. And so for everyone in Iran, they learned that, hey, this is how Khomeini was able to keep power. Massacres, and then out of fear, everyone tried to safeguard their own families because everyone had either lost someone they knew or lost a loved one. So, everyone went underground. Everyone became silent. We can't allow that to happen again. And that is, I think, the lesson that people have learned. Also, one of the other things is right now, and it's been about 12 years that the Iranian resistance has pushed forward a strategy. We call it resistance units. So the MEK has set forth a strategy of forming units of resistance throughout Iran in all 31 provinces. These are groups of 3-4 people, sometimes up to 20 people who come together. They're local to that area, so they understand, they know who is who, what is being done. They have a good understanding of the situation. And then they carry out activities and things against the regime. Like, for instance, in 2024, they carried out over 39,000 activities throughout Iran and targeted over 3,000 centers of oppression. So with that, they've kept the flame of resistance alive throughout Iran. In the last year, we have witnessed numerous people that the regime has sentenced to execution for being a member of the resistance units to try to spread fear in society, for people to not join this movement. But in fact, everyone started realizing this is the only group that the regime keeps on putting its finger on because they fear them. So they are the solution. And in this protest, actually, I don't know if you've noticed, because we have been looking at all of the footage and everything coming out, but a lot of people who we've also spoken to, a lot of reporters I've spoken to, they said we could see a organizational structure in the protest. We saw that, there are these groups of people who come together. They are able to organize people on the streets. They're able to, regroup. They're able to, just tell people, like, this is what we need to do. This is what needs to be done. And that's how the protests were pushed forward. So that was the role of the resistance units. And a lot of people that we were speaking to inside of Iran, they're like, you know what? Automatically, people felt like when they went to the streets, they knew what they were supposed to do. They knew that they have to, like, disarm the security forces. They knew that they need to use fire to protect themselves and whatnot. So where were they getting this from? This was things that they had been seeing over these years by the resistance units. It was in the back of their mindsets, And so on the day that they needed it, it came to their, to their aid. They're like, oh, this is what needs to be done. This is how we need to stay steadfast. This is the messaging that we need to have. We need to target the entirety of the regime. So Khomeini himself, that needs to be the center of our slogans, to make that clear, whatnot. So we are seeing the growth of resistance units in Iran. Just practically, we've seen it double in recent years every year. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers for 2025 just because the uprising broke out, and so we don't have that numbers, but we should be having that in the next month or so. But really, you see that on the ground and how it's, its effect. And you also see the role of, these rebellious youth, the Gen Z of Iran, but also the women of Iran, who feel like they have nothing to lose. So that gives them this courage to stand and to continue. And I think also the Gen Z of Iran, right now we are in the age of communication and technology. They're seeing how the world is living, and they compare it to what they have themselves, and then they understand that this is not the norm.
Yeah.
So we need to do something to change it. And we have a saying in Farsi, we say, no one's going to scratch your back except your own finger. And so the Iranian resistance has always stood by this principle of independence, because the reality is, unfortunately, other countries, they have their own interests. They're not in it for democracy of the Iranian people. I mean, even right now that they are negotiating with the regime, it's not because people who are being killed on the streets, it's Iran's nuclear program, its missile program, or whatnot. Human rights and democracy, they take a back seat, unfortunately. So it's the people of Iran who have to form their own destiny and take it into their own hands. And that is what we're calling for, and that is what we stand for. And we think that our people has the potential and the capability to bring about that change because we have an organized resistance. And we have like the 10-point plan that's been set forth by Mrs. Rajavi. It's this 10-point plan. Many have called it like Jeffersonian. Many have said, it's a clear roadmap. But the reality is that it has garnered the support of over 4,000 lawmakers around the world, over 130 former heads of state, 100 Nobel winners have supported it. And this is something that when you put it down, it might look like just 10 points, but you see step by step, it creates those guardrails to make sure that we're on the right path. Non-nuclear Iran, ballot box is the final criterion. Having those systems intact, separation of the branches and independent judiciary, these are all very key. And the abolition of the IRGC, all these suppressive forces that the regime has created, they're not going to be recycled into the new system. This is, the end of this chapter of suppression.
Yeah. Well, how can the international community support the NCRI in their efforts?
Well, I think that it's, first of all, end the policy of appeasement, because unfortunately we are the main bargaining chips used every single time. So
Right.
end the policy of appeasement toward the Iranian regime, hold the regime accountable for its crimes. Just in the past month, the regime has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, but there's no talks of it. The regime even raided hospitals and killed people who were wounded in their hospital beds and arrested the doctors and nurses attending to them and has been handing out execution sentences for them for doing their job. So firm policy on Iran, hold the regime accountable, recognize the right of the Iranian people to resist. That's the only thing we're asking for, really. And the other thing is, unfortunately, till now, the policy of appeasement, these countries, it's not that they're just bystanders, they're actually giving aid to the regime. Where is the regime getting all this technology from for surveillance and for face recognition technology and all of that they're using for communication and the censorship? Everything. These are all tools that are being provided to it by Western companies. That needs to stop. I think the world could have provided communications options or possibilities for the people of Iran instead of
Sure.
allowing that 19-day blackout.
Yeah,
So
where's
these are the
Starlink?
things that we're asking for, and we're not. And also to shut down Iran's terror embassies, their offices, because that's where they're networking from and they're working from. And yeah, so just that is all that the resistance is asking for. Mr. Rajavi actually outlined a 6-point call to the international community last week in Berlin. In Berlin, tens of thousands of Iranians gathered last week on the anniversary of the 1979 revolution, but also to honor those who had died in the recent uprisings in Iran. And Mrs. Rajavi actually addressed this gathering. What was very interesting about this gathering was the fact that you saw people from all walks of life coming together, and you saw that solidarity. Like you saw representatives from all the different ethnicities of Iran coming together under, not one roof because it was a protest, but you know what I mean, coming together.
Yeah.
To be able to just stand for the people of Iran with putting aside any differences that they may have, because there's so much more similarities that they have with one another and, unifying values than they have differences. And I think that's something that's really important in these days.
Did targeted sanctions on the regime have a positive impact for the resistance?
They have had a positive impact because even, Iranian people, they actually support the regime being sanctioned, smart sanctions on the regime, because the reality is that the Iranian regime uses all of the resources of the country for suppression. So if anything's going to cut that funding for the suppressive forces, the people of Iran support it. Yes, there are certain aspects that might make certain aspects of life a bit more difficult, but the reality is that even if you remove those sanctions, it's not like it's going to the people of Iran, because the people of Iran, unfortunately, over 60% of them are living under complete line of poverty, and 80% are living under the line of poverty right now. So the situation in Iran it's much more drastic than comes to mind. And so really the sanctions are mostly affecting the regime than the people, because the people have already, surpassed that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess from our perspective here in the United States that want to support the resistance, really a lot of it's going to come down to we need to speak with our politicians, our representatives, especially those in Congress and even in the state house, to push for potentially targeted sanctions against the resistance. Like with I'm amazed that the regime is now using Bitcoin as one of their sources for financial support. That to me feels crazy because I still don't believe in Bitcoin. I mean, we saw Bitcoin this week. They came out and said that since October, Bitcoin has lost half of its value. So I have to imagine that has a huge immediate impact on the regime in Iran if that's part of where their funding comes from. So maybe Bitcoin continue to lose a lot of your value. That would be good. Let me ask you, I know we're short on time, but I want to ask for the Republic Guard, for the actual police sort of system that the regime uses. Is there a resistance inside of the Guard, the Republican Guard that can be utilized, or that is making any sort of impact from inside?
But at the end of the day, in every dictatorship, there are those that on the last days they will, defect because it's not to their benefit anymore. For a lot of them, it is just a wage. That's why you see that in the uprisings in Iran in the last 20 years, a lot of times the regime brings in their militias and proxy groups for suppression, because and even Iranians that they do use, they have them transferred to another province, not their own province, because people aren't willing to kill their own a lot of times. So the regime has had to take those drastic measures to be able to utilize its suppressive forces. That's where, like, for instance, in Iran, there's the military, and then there's the IRGC, and then there's the security forces, state security forces. State security forces, IRGC, and the Basij are what is used for the suppression of, protests in Iran. But right now, just this past, actually 2 weeks ago, I think the regime has now brought a clause to combine the army and the IRGC, so they can have that. It's still in the process, so I'm not really sure where it lies right now. But the reality is that, a lot of them will defect, but to rely on them, no, you can't really rely on that. The reality is, as I said, what we rely on is the resistance forces, which is growing within the country too. And organized resistance is what's going to create change eventually. Like, for instance, the son of the former dictator of Iran, the Shah, he supports, he continuously says that I depend on IRGC, and he keeps on telling them, giving them these promises that, if I come, I will just recycle that system and have you still, make sure that you still have a place in the future government or whatnot. So that is what he's, relying on. But I don't know if you saw, just 2 days ago, he was being questioned by Christian Amanpour, and she was like, you said 50,000 members of the IRGC and Basij have defected and joined you. Where were they during the uprising? We didn't see any signs of it. But the reality is that that's not something to depend on. I'm sorry, but this is like my personal view myself. But I think that those who are not that principled, who are willing to go and work for the regime, knowing that, this is how they are gaining their money, it's not someone that you can rely on either way. So I don't think we should have a look for that. I think that in every system, every dictatorship, there will be a lot of defection because, they're not in it because they believe in the regime. They're in it because it fits their needs or their benefits that they have for it. But so I think that we will be seeing that, and we have seen it every time in each uprising. You see like some like regime's ambassadors defecting and things like that. But this time, two have defected, one in Switzerland and one in Austria. So I mean, these things happen each time, but it's not something that you should be counting on at the end of the day. But as
Yeah,
you said, if
absolutely.
people want to do something, reaching out to your lawmakers, there is in the US, there's OIAC, or known as OIAC. It's the Organization of Iranian American Communities. They have chapters in over 40 states. So you probably covered there. If you reach out to them, they could put you in contact with the local chapters. There's a lot of work that we do on Capitol Hill. So, doing that, writing op-eds in your local newspaper, bringing attention to this. What is the solution on Iran? The solution is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the Iranian resistance. And the solution is the people of Iran are not stuck between the current theocracy and the previous classical dictatorship and the monarchy. They want to move forward to a secular democratic republic in Iran. And that is the messaging that I think we need to push forward everywhere. The people of Iran revolted for a reason in 1979. I don't see anyone recycling dictatorships anytime soon. That is not what we're into. So, yeah.
I don't know. Our country seems to be toying with it a little.
Right.
Well, that's not the Iranian people. So the Iranian people are going to take their, because I know that is something that is being presented, unfortunately, especially in the media, that, return of the, monarchy and the Shah. That's just unrealistic.
Well, Zalal, if we come asking for your assistance and the help of the resistance that successfully toppled the regime in Iran, I hope you'll come.
Well, I think that it will have its ripple effect. I think change in Iran will, change a lot of things around the world, especially when we have Mrs. Rajavi, she is a trailblazer when it comes to women's rights. I hope that there's a chance one day that you guys can learn about that or read about it a little bit. But she has so many progressive ideas that I know, like the day that she sets her foot in Iran, we will see the results, I think, internationally. And I think that's something that a lot of people are afraid of, some of these Western powers, that the geopolitical role that she can have, that is what they're afraid of. But hopefully we'll see that soon, the dawn of freedom in Iran. And hopefully, instead of Iran being a destabilizing force in the region, hopefully it'll take its, correct, or the role that it should have as a stabilizing force, as a force that will help, push humanity forward, not backwards. Iran has the greatest number of brain drain in the world. So just imagine if those people could actually serve their own people. Yeah. So I think that we will see a beautiful Iran flourish soon, hopefully.
You mentioned the education being at the front of what people in Iran expect. We're talking about a region, the Persians, and that area gave us algebra and arithmetic, and
medicine.
We figured out, medicine. I mean, the contributions,
even literature,
written language.
And we were the country that had, the first civilization that had a human rights charter. And now our people are suffering this way. So that's sad for Iranians. That's something that we always feel like, centuries ago, we put together the first human rights charter. And now look at our people. They're the number one state, the victims of the number one human rights violator in the world.
Well, I can speak for Zach. We absolutely support the movement and we support the resistance. And I want text messages from the day that you ultimately land in Tehran, a free Tehran, pictures of what is to come, because it's exciting to see that you all are mounting such a wealth of support internationally too. So I'm really hoping that this happens soon. I absolutely will write an op-ed. I will absolutely contact, because our senators and our Congress people here in South Carolina, I think they turn a blind eye to what is going on in Iran, and hope that that whatever happens just benefits the United States or United States interests, and that isn't the way that we need to look at it. It's got to be what benefits the people of Iran the most. I sincerely appreciate you coming on our show and talking with us, and I hope that we can continue to hear from you and watch you. Have you spent time in Iran?
Fortunately, no. I was born and raised abroad. My parents came to the U.S. before the revolution. My father, he actually studied law in Tehran University, and he graduated like top of his class. Then he was offered a position by the Shah to become like a judge, but it was a judge that had to go, do the bidding of the Shah. And so my dad refused. For that, he was arrested and he was imprisoned by the Savak. So after he was released, my grandfather was like, my dad had gotten a full scholarship to American U. My grandfather was like, you need to immediately leave the country. You're not staying here, because they might have you killed. So he came to the U.S. to pursue his studies, and then the 1979 revolutions happened. So they were here. But yeah, so I actually never had the chance to go to Iran.
Gotcha.
But I could honestly say there hasn't been a day in my life that I haven't thought about the Iranian people and their plight, and hopefully we can bring about that change that's needed.
I think that the likelihood is you are one of thousands and thousands, 10,000, 100,000 of people that desired to live in the country of their origin, because but under the pretense that it is not controlled by a murderous regime. I hope that for you, that you get to go and reclaim your citizenship in Iran. So
thank you very much,
Zalal. Yeah, Zalal, I really very much appreciate you being on the show with us, for taking time out of your day, even though the weather in Paris is not great. What before we wrap it up, anything in how long are you in Paris for?
I've been here now for 2 years.
Okay. What any Parisian foods that you like or that interest you the most?
Not really. I think I tend to stick to more Persian food, and also the food that I grew up with, which is more like American or Italian and things like that. Yeah.
Sure.
Fair.
I don't blame you. I've had some. I think that I'm trying to think. Cheeses in France are usually pretty good. I don't know that I can think of. I like steak, but completely raw. I need at least to reach a temperature that kills off anything. I'm always the fact that people from France can eat, what is it, tartare?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's brave. That's brave.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure to be able to be
absolutely.
on, and look forward to staying in contact. And
absolutely.
And I'll send you the details of where people can connect and learn more about the resistance.
Perfect. Thank you, Zalal. All right. That is going to do it for episode number 295. Links to all of our past episodes, podcast platforms, merchandise, and social media are available on our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com. And if you think our financial model of giving away free content and entertainment is silly, and you're in the giving mood, why not become an official Nothinger and support the show? Members get early access to this episode as well as exclusive content. Visit members.theallaboutnothing.com, or you can find a link on our webpage. You can also give a one-time donation through the same link. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can call and leave us a message, 803-672-0533, or you can email us at theshow@theallaboutnothing.com. You can also join our Discord server. Links can be found on our webpage. Thanks for listening, everybody. You all stay safe, be kind, and
keep your hands to yourself.
The All About Nothing podcast is a product of Big Media and produced and engineered by me, Barrett Gruber. Thanks to Cake for our intro music, Sick of You. You can follow Everything Cake the band at cakemusic.com. Thanks to Muff the producer for our outro music. You can follow Muff on Instagram at Muff the producer. You can follow me across social media by visiting Linktree/Barrett Gruber. And you can follow Zach King on Linktree/AANZach. Want to support the show? Visit our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com, and become a member. There are several tiers available that give you early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. To find links to our social media, podcast platforms, and merchandise to support the show, as well as past episodes, visit theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can call our number and leave a message. Dial 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is more than you can handle, check out our sister shows. What the Pod Was That with Carrie, Zach, and myself. Welcome to Wonderland with Ami. Politically Speaking with Erica, Kirsten, and Emily. And Black, White, and Blue in the South with Dr. Jamil Brooks and Bill Kimmler. Please subscribe and share this show. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and punch that notification bell. Thank you for listening, and hear us next week.